this is a great question. Si los cubanos tienen tanto miedo, why are they back so often? If the Cubans are so afraid, if they're persecuted, why do they go back to the place where they were persecuted? Great question. Very difficult to explain, even more difficult to grasp, especially if you weren't born in a communist country. But I'm going to try to explain it the best way that I understand it and hope that that is good for you, or at least somewhat gives you more clarity. So let's start with the fact that everyone in Cuba is oppressed, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you are part of the system by conviction or convenience, you're still being oppressed, okay? Aunque seas parte del comunismo porque eres revolucionario por convicción o por conveniencia because you don't want to meterte en lío, you're still oppressed because the laws and the rules and laws in Cuba are designed to repress and limit and cut basic human rights. Now, there are people in Cuba that actually speak up against the system, and those people suffer repression, okay? Back in the day, las personas religiosas that insisted in proclaiming su fe, their faith, they were thrown in jail. My dad has friends que por leer una revista cristiana en un parque, just reading, in public, en un parque, quietly, arrested, because that was illegal. En un tiempo, okay? That's not the case anymore, but similar things like that still happen en otros ámbitos. Not necessarily religious, but en otros ámbitos sucede eso en Cuba todavía. And that's why we have a lot of political prisoners and a lot of people leaving Cuba, risking their lives, tirándose al mar en una balsa, leaving Cuba on a raft, leaving Cuba by marrying un extranjero, leaving Cuba by crossing una frontera, yéndose a ver los volcanes a Nicaragua, and then boom, they're in Mexico, boom, they're crossing the border. A lot of people leaving Cuba, porque en Cuba hay represión. Cuba es una dictadura. There's no way around that, okay? Cuba is a dictatorial regime. El gobierno de Cuba es una dictadura. Let's leave that at that. Now, if you're so oppressed, why do you go back to that dictadura? Doesn't make any sense. Really, it doesn't, but it kind of does at the same time. So listen to this. When you are in Cuba, you represent a problem. They have to keep you in check. They have to keep you under control, especially if you want to speak up, especially if you want to be a little, tú sabes, reaccionario, a little rebelde against the revolution. If you're a gusano, as they call it, they need to watch out for you, and you need to be careful because you could easily end up killed or in prison, okay? Or kicked out of your country. Maybe that's the best thing that could happen to a lot of people. They get kicked out. No regrese. No regrese. You can go, but don't come back because we don't want any trouble here. You know, some people aren't allowed to go back. Let's leave that also clear. Hay gente que no puede regresar a Cuba. Now, usually those are leaders, okay? Personas significantes that could cause, stir up things if they're seen in Cuba. So, for the most part, the rest are allowed to go back. And why do they go back? If they claim here that Cuba is a dictatorship and they're oppressed in Cuba. Well, that's not a lie. As I explained, everyone is oppressed in Cuba, some more than others. But they go back because they can. That's a simple answer. The simple answer is they go back because they can, because they're allowed to. Cuba allows most people to come back in, and the United States also allows people to travel there. The Cubans to travel there and visit family. For the most part, visit family, correct? Algunos se van a pariciar, but let's just, right? Why do they allow them to go back? And why do Cubans go back? When you are in Cuba, you represent an actual problem, a physical problem. You're living there. So they need to keep you. But once you leave Cuba, you're no longer the problem there. You represent profit. So you go from being the problem to being profit. Because when you come back to visit family, you bring money. You take them out to the hotels, to the restaurants, because you want to give them un gustito a papá, a mamá. right? They play on the nostalgia. They even encourage you to travel back con todas estas agencias de viaje, these charters. They encourage you to travel back to Cuba porque es el lugar donde tú naciste, donde you have mommy and papi and you have abuela and your uncle may be sick. So ¿cómo tú vas a abandonar a tu familia? So they play on that nostalgia and they blind el exilio de pensar más allá of the immediate problem they may be resolving. And most of them not realizing that they're actually funding their family's long-time suffering. So it's a very sinister, very macabro. The system is very designed to be very dark because it's really living off the backs of those people that it oppressed. Because it's given them a false sense of safety. It's like almost saying, oye, you left, pero bueno, come back. We're not going to do anything to you. It gives people a false sense of safety to travel back, a false guarantee, and there's no guarantee, but that's what I'm saying, a false guarantee that you will not be persecuted if you go back to visit your family because vienes a ver a tu familia. Eso hay que respetarlo. La familia es lo primero. And that's why people feel encouraged to go back. People are encouraged by a lot of campañas de turismo. Come back. Visita Cuba. Ven, tráele a tu familia cositas. They have platforms where you could send your family food. The food that the regular people in Cuba don't have. Oh, it's in Cuba. Just nobody has access to unless you pay dollars. So once you're there, when you live there, you're a problem. When you leave, you are profit. You represent money. And the government in Cuba, sadly, para el exilio, vive del exilio. La dictadura cubana se abastece del exilio. Del mismo capitalismo que tanto critican. That same exile that they criticize and they spit on, ellos viven de nosotros. Bueno, de algunos de nosotros, decimos. I learned this when I traveled to Cuba as an adult. Y ya yo dije, más nunca. It took that trip to actually realize what was going on. I came from Cuba when I was 8 years old. And when I realized que eso es lo que estaba pasando, I got chills. Because it's really hard to tell people, oye, no vayas a ver a tu mamá. Like, I don't have la cara de decirlo because I've never been far away from my parents like that where I can't see them. I've never had a moral conflict of going to see my parents. But Cubans, because of that family tie, a lot of times, algunos, otros son descarados. Okay, but I'm talking about the ones that go over and over a visitar a la familia, a mantener a la familia, que se matan aquí trabajando a mantener a la familia. They're not seeing or not realizing, or they're turning a blind eye porque les duele entender y ver y aceptar que están fundando la dictadura que está oprimiendo a su familia y sus generaciones for years to come. See, while we're solving an immediate problem de que hay una comidita, una medicinita, what we're doing is prolonging their suffering. And that's why people go back, because they can. Because the government won't persecute most Cubans that go back. Hay cubanos que they go back and they get persecuted igual. Hay gente que se arriesga y regresa y el gobierno le pone el dedo. Some even get arrested if they participate in, like the people that were from here, from the U.S., and they went to Cuba. And las protestas del Julio 11 caught them in Cuba. They got arrested, thrown in jail in Cuba. So don't think that que tampoco, it's so safe to go back. No. For the most part, they give you a false sense of safety so you can go back and spend money because el gobierno cubano es un descaro. Es macabro, es siniestro y se abastece del dolor del exilio, de la nostalgia del exilio. Y el día que el exilio understands fully and accepts that, then maybe we'll have some change.